Okay, so welcome everyone to another study, and this is kind of a different one, understanding timing delays in the Bible. And this will relate to the character of God, and there's some interesting things here. Sometimes people misinterpret things in the Bible because they do not understand the timing involved, or they make assumptions about the timing. So this study is in defense of an earlier study concerning this verse, 1 Samuel 15:3.
Now go and attack Amalek and utterly destroy all that they have, and do not spare them, but kill both man and woman, infant and nursing child, ox and sheep, camel and donkey.
We can't go into this whole thing in detail now. We're looking at some aspects of it that will help us to understand the timing. But this link kind of goes through the whole story in detail, so a person could go there. Basically, in our earlier studies, we found that Saul had already smitten the Amaleks before 1 Samuel 15:3, and this is shown in 1 Samuel 14:48.
Okay. And he acted valiantly and defeated the Amalekites. I don't know if it's Amalekites or Amalekites, and saved Israel from the hands of those who plundered them.
So the word "I remember" from up here, 1 Samuel 15:3, should actually be translated "I visit." And here's the link for, and visit is really to allow the consequences of actions to naturally occur. But it's interesting that remember, the Hebrew word is pakad, P-A-Q-A-D. That would be a good Scrabble word. That word is in the past tense in this verse. And when you go through the story, you'll see that this all in 1 Samuel 15:3 is all in the past tense. And I put this link here because this very much relates to the mirror principle, which we can't go into now, but that would be good background information. So chapter 15 is basically a recounting of an earlier event, as various literal versions say. And here's one, the Young's literal translation.
Now go, and thou hast smitten Amalek, and devoted all that it has, and thou hast no pity on it, and hast put to death from man unto woman, from infant unto suckling, from ox unto sheep, from camel unto ass.
Okay. And here's another link about that. So one commentary I use often says the reference to the Amalekites in chapter 14:48 may refer to this campaign, in other words, to this version in 1 Samuel 15:3. For verses 49 to 52 are obviously parenthetical. Okay, the verses 49 to 52 just talk about the different people involved and some genealogy and things. In order to kind of back up what I'm saying here, I want to show other cases where the order seems to be changed or there are delays in the narrative. Okay, so we're going to look at several examples. Genesis 2:17.
But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. In the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die.
It's pretty obvious that Adam and Eve did not die that day, the day they ate the fruit. In fact, it was delayed for nearly 1,000 years. The margin we're reading for "thou shalt surely die" is "dying, thou shalt die."
Sophie has her hand up.
We know, especially from the New Testament, then when someone said that you are dead, that was meant you are dead in your sins. That means you are spiritually dead because you turned away from God. So in that, when we read that Genesis 2:17 with this in mind, they did die that minute. They turned away from God.
My point is, in the original language, the meaning is that it is a process. They would start to die. They would be dying, but that would go on. Their bodies would break down because of their disconnect from God, and eventually would totally break down. They would die. So it was a process that started then, but took a long time to complete. And it's important to recognize that it was not an imposed punishment, but a natural consequence of their separation from God. Okay, here's another example. Exodus 33:20.
Okay. He further said, you cannot see my face, for mankind shall not see me and live.
Okay, this does not mean if you happen to see God, he will kill you. Okay, a person could almost read it that way. Again, it is a cause and effect. You become what you look at, what you emulate. Now, this is important here to make the distinction between father and son. And I can't go into this too much detail, but there's definitely a difference between them. It's not like the Catholic idea that they're exactly the same. Okay, let's read Isaiah 14:14.
I will ascend above the heights of the clouds, and I will be like the Most High.
Okay, this is Satan saying this. He wanted to be like the Most High. He wanted to be like the Father, not the Son. Okay. I believe this was the Father who is the Most High, who answers to no one, rather than the Son who said things like this, John 8:29.
And he who sent me is with me. The Father has not left me alone, for I always do those things that please him.
Okay. And there's other verses. He has given me all things, he said. And I think at some point in the future, Michael is going to give us a presentation about all of this and the relation between Father and the Son. We need to look at Yeshua. And of course, he's the one we can look at because of everything that was given to us in the Gospels. There's so much detail given to him, so many relations of his interactions with people, etc. Okay, the sanctuary cleansing. In Daniel chapter 8, Daniel was receiving a vision that concerned the sanctuary, and he was told, Daniel 8:14.
And he said to me, for 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary will be properly restored.
Okay. And details of that are given at this link. And again, there's a deviation in the translation from the original meaning. It should be more like, and he said unto me, unto 2,300 days, then the sanctuary shall be cleansing to be cleansed. Okay. The idea is cleansing process is going to start with the object of having the whole place eventually cleansed, but it's a process. It's not going to be cleansed at that very point, at the end of the 2,300 days. That's when the process starts. So it's a process that will start at a certain time and proceed over time to its eventual completion. Michael?
Oh, I just was looking at a chat.
No man can see God and live the way he did so far. Okay, that's another way of looking at it. I think the idea is if you see God and truly understand him, I think this is the gist of what you're saying, it will change you to live a different way.
So it doesn't mean that you will drop dead physically.
Right.
That's the way I read it.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, the way you put it is good there, and it could have that meaning. Because we are influenced by what we look at, for sure. Okay, here I put down, people don't die from bad thought attacks, as in heart attacks. Romans 8:6.
For to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace.
Okay, to be carnally minded is to be, thinking and acting according to the carnal mind, the fleshly lusts, etc. So if you think a bad thought according to fleshly or carnal lusts, you won't drop dead on the spot. It is speaking of a trend that will lead eventually towards death. But of course, you can change your course. Okay. This verse is similar, Romans 6:16.
Do you not know that the one to whom you present yourselves as slaves for obedience, you are slaves of that same one whom you obey, either of sin resulting in death or of disobedience resulting in righteousness?
The point is that what you do, like especially in this verse, will not result in immediate death. It's a trend. Okay, Revelation 20:4-5. This is one where timing is quite important.
And I saw thrones, and they sat upon them, and judgment was given unto them. And I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for the witness of Jesus, and for the word of God, and which had not worshipped the beast, neither his image, neither had received his mark upon their foreheads, or in their hands. And they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. But the rest of the dead lived not again until the 1,000 years were finished. This is the first resurrection.
People get really confused over this, but when you lay it out carefully, it makes total sense. In verse 4, people were resurrected and lived for 1,000 years, and that is called the first, or that is the first resurrection. And then in verse 5, later, more are resurrected, and those are referred to as the rest of the dead. They were resurrected after the 1,000 years, whereas the first group were resurrected at the start of 1,000 years. So obviously, this is the second resurrection. But then the confusing part is this verse says this is the first resurrection. Well, obviously, it's referring to this resurrection, not this one in the verse just before it. Okay, it's like this is out of place, and it should be there.
Verse 5 is out of place.
Yeah. Well, either
Yeah,
one, let's switch them around. Okay. They lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. This is the first resurrection. That would make more sense. And then you say, but the rest of the dead. Okay. Yeah, I think that's pretty obvious when you look at it carefully. Now, here's an interesting timing thing. Simon the Pharisee, the feast he had just a week before Yeshua died. Okay, John 12, 1 and 2.
Then 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, who had been dead, whom he had raised from the dead. There they made him a supper, and Martha served, but Lazarus was one of those who sat at the table with him.
Okay, so I've seen so many scenarios for the timing here, so many timelines, and I haven't seen anyone else actually this understood this the way I have, this particular part. The real clue is the word there. Okay. So it's saying 6 days before the Passover, he came to Bethany. There in Bethany, they made him a supper. And then verses 3 to 11 describe the supper. And then it says on the next day. That's not the next day after the supper. That's the next day after he arrived in Bethany. So the supper actually happened, I believe, on the Tuesday evening, whereas this next day was what some refer to as Palm Sunday. So the thing is, it's there, not then. And this is all explained in this link here, where I go into the timing of the resurrection. If you don't look at the there and you think it's then, it's totally confusing. And that's why people come up with so many scenarios. But it's very clear when you look at that. In our Western culture, we tend to take things literally and chronologically when they're not always meant that way. Okay, people back in Bible times were not so chronological as we are. It's a totally different mindset. They had more of a circular reasoning, where we have more of a linear reasoning. This Luke 7 refers to Luke chapter 7, where Luke recounts Simon's feast way, way early in his gospel, totally out of place. But it's just another example of, how it's different than we might think. Michael.
yeah, that's why we can't take the Bible as it reads.
Yeah.
Right, I mean, we can in places.
But we have to take the whole Bible. And I just wanted to show here, I've got a chronological Bible.
Yeah,
And it's a good example of how the Bible is not written in chronological order. When you want to find a portion of scripture in here, you have to go to the index in the back and find it. And it'll be totally mixed up with, with other parts of the Bible, because it was not written, it's not a chronological account of what happened. Sort of related to timing, maybe, is the Bible states tendencies, trends, and likelihoods that are not necessarily absolutes. So where it says, if you live by the sword, you will die by the sword, that doesn't mean everyone that's ever stabbed someone with a sword died by the sword. It's just giving a tendency that if you live in violence, you're likely to encounter violence in your life. Okay. Here's another interesting example. Exodus 31:14.
You shall keep the Sabbath, therefore, for it is holy unto you. Everyone that defiles it shall surely be put to death. For whosoever doeth any work therein, that soul shall be cut off from among his people.
Okay, so does that sound, shall surely be put to death? Does that sound like judicial execution, and perhaps very quickly and certainly with no chance of parole, makes God sound pretty concerned for his law. He is concerned, but because if we break his law, it hurts us. It's not because he is offended. All his laws are made for our good. That's the only way an other-centered God would make laws. But it's interesting that the wording here, shall surely, and I put the H4191, that's the Strong's number, and it's repeated twice here. The original word is actually muth. So it's muth in the Hebrew. They would emphasize things. We would say surely be put to death, but they would say muth, repeating something as a way of emphasizing it. But it's interesting that 4191 is used, the first time it's used is Genesis 2:17.
But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die.
Okay, so we already reasoned earlier today that thou shalt surely die was not referring to dropping dead after taking a bite of fruit. It happened much, much later. It was a process that started from that. So this has been very badly translated. Everyone that defiles it, sets in motion more and more of a separation from God. And of course, that can be changed. A person can repent, okay? But if you persist in disobeying God's laws, you're bringing death upon yourself, really. Because all of God's laws are for our good. And when we disobey them, we're only hurting ourselves and possibly others. Okay, the point here is that there was no immediate execution in the Garden of Eden, which was the first use of this term. Perhaps it could mean the same in other uses. And it's been used in quite a few verses, been mistranslated more like this. Okay. And also in that verse, it talks about that soul shall be cut off, which can sound like dying again, could be understood that way. Being cut off, which can sound like to be cut off in death, was a reference to being excluded from the covenant. So the verse could be read as, "You shall keep the Sabbath, therefore, for it is holy unto you. Everyone that defileth shall surely die." Okay, not be put to death. "For whosoever doeth any work therein, that soul shall be set apart from among his people." You're excluding yourself from the covenant that was made to God's people. Okay, so in God's timetable, and we've looked at examples where his timetable has been misunderstood, I guess is a way to put it. God is long-suffering, he's patient, his purposes have no haste or delay. And we can't go into that now, but I believe there's a 7,000-year time set by God to solve this great controversy, from creation week to the end of the millennium. We often interpret or translate according to our own way of thinking, our concept of the flow of events and chronological time. And in doing that, we often make mistakes. And that's been many mistakes happen because of translations, because of what the translators have done in the past. So that's just a little bit to help show that we need to understand chronology properly, and it can factor into some of these things we just looked at. So